Good morning, everyone that's joining us here and everyone that's joining us online. Just for those of you that aren't aware that are sitting here with me, we are recording live, doing a simulcast webinar as well. That might contribute to why some of the people that enrolled live didn't show up and why we have so many attending online, but that's great. No, we just started doing the webinar thing, so out of respect for everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started with REALIST this morning. My name is Dustin Graeber, and I am one of the MLS technicians here at Oakmar. I'll be taking you through REALIST for our hour together here. Those of you join online, if you could save your questions for the end, I'll do my best to save a couple of minutes at the end to answer any questions. So I've already logged in to the MLS. Here's my member dashboard. And there are a couple of ways we can get into REALIST. Obviously, the CoreLogic REALIST icon here on the dashboard is going to be one way. If we were to go into CoreLogic Matrix, we can also access REALIST. Oh, I haven't shared the screen. My apologies to everyone online. There we go. Let me backtrack just a half step. There's my member dashboard once I log into the MLS. We have the CoreLogic REALIST icon, and I'm going to show you an alternate route to get into REALIST through Matrix. So I already have Matrix open in another tab in my browser. The REALIST tax button, the blue tab towards the center of the screen, is going to be how you would access REALIST. So whether we click the icon on the dashboard or the REALIST tax button in Matrix, it's going to take us to the same place. Now with REALIST, it does require Adobe Flash. So if you don't have Adobe Flash installed, then you might need to click the link here. If you have Google Chrome, Chrome comes with Adobe Flash already integrated into that product. So although that might be the case, just a side note, even if you are in Google Chrome, you'll have to click the link and allow Google Chrome to run Flash. This can seem a little cumbersome, I know, but Adobe is phasing Flash out by the end of the year 2020. In response to that, I believe CoreLogic has informed us that they're trying to move REALIST over to a platform that doesn't utilize Adobe Flash. But until then, you're going to see these web browsers, your Google Chromes, your Internet Explorers. They're going to make it tougher and tougher to get those Flash using applications to run. It's kind of a bait for those developers to move their products from Flash. So once we get REALIST open, we have our default display. We have a search panel on the left-hand side. The property display is going to be split. You'll have a map on the top and a grid on the bottom. So if we were to perform a search, we would not only see those search results come up as tags on our map, and we'd also see those single line results below. Before we actually move into searching, we can change the view of the screen. If we only want to see the map, for example, there's a map link here on the right hand side. It's about right in between where our map and grid are. And that'll show us just the map. Now our options have gone up here above the map, so now I'm just going to click grid. So that'll just show us a results grid. And then we can go back to the split display if we wish. There is, I know it's a little hard to see for those of you sitting here, but there is an icon kind of in the middle at the very bottom of the map that we can use to increase or decrease the size of that split. It's right here in the middle. These 3 lines, and then your cursor will actually change once you're hovering over it. Just hold down the left button on your mouse and then just drag it to the position you would like to leave it in. So I'm going to take our attention back to the search panel on the left-hand side, and the first thing to be sure you take note of before you perform a search is that you are searching in the correct county. So no matter how specific you make a search or how broad, if you're searching in the wrong county, that can make all the difference in the results that you get. So let me back up. I didn't mean to click that right away. In the top left-hand corner, I already have Seminole County selected, but I'm going to change the region or change county in this case. So if I left click on change region, it's going to show me all 77 counties in the state. On the right-hand side, you see the counties that I currently have selected. Adjacent to that is a red icon that I can use to remove all of them. So if I had several that I wanted to remove, I could just clear it and then start over. I'm going to go ahead and select Oklahoma County and Cleveland County. You can select up to 8 as denoted down here in the bottom left-hand corner of my pop-up here. So I have applied that to my search, and you'll notice that if I have one county selected, then it will display the name of that county, but if it's any more than that, then it will just come up and say that I have multiple counties. So if you're unsure what counties you have selected, it's no problem. Just click change region. You don't actually have to make any changes here. And then you can see which of those you have. So the default search that Realist gives you is a quick search. You can use an address if you know the owner's name, if you know that it's associated with an MLS listing, or the tax ID. Usually you can get that from the county assessors or the public records. You'll see next to each of these search criteria, there's a blue hyperlinked text. These all say starts with. This will get a little different whenever we do a more specific My Search, where we can add search criteria. So there's if I click on starts with, it's going to give me an option to use starts with, or I can use is. So if I know exactly what an address is, then I will search for that exact address. Using starts with is just going to allow you to be a little more open. You don't necessarily have to have that information exactly right. Before I move over to my search, there is a clear. So if I want to clear all of my criteria here, I can do that. Any search field that you see a plus next to, you can search for multiple values. So if I wanted to search for 123 Main, well, address isn't going to let me do that, so let me back up, excuse me. So once you start to enter a value into one of these fields with the plus sign, it should embolden that plus. That means we can add the value that I've typed in there to my search. And then I can go on down the line. If I want to remove values, there's a small X next to that value. I can just left click it to remove it from my search. The quick search, it's not going to let me actually perform a search until I enter something into one of these fields. But I'm going to save actually running a search for my search, which is just the next tab over from quick search. I'm going to left click my search, and already at the top here we see a few more options than we had with a quick search. Since my search is more customizable, you have the ability to save a search. That will then give you the option the next time that you log in to open a search. So if I left click open search, I have a few that I have created. Well, I think these are default searches because they're locked, and I wasn't here in 2011. So had I saved some searches, they would appear here and they would not be locked. So I'm going to cancel out of here if it will let me. And like with our quick search, we have the ability to clear our search and thus clear our results grid. This recent history icon will just show you searches that you've performed in the current session. So if you performed a search 10 minutes ago, you still got Realist up, you can go back to that set of criteria that you had. And then last, over here to the left, you can create a new search, similar to clearing the search in the grid there. So if we want to edit which criteria we have displayed here for our search, there is a button at the bottom of this panel called Edit Attributes. If we left click on Edit Attributes, we get a pop-up that will allow me to select which attributes or search criteria that we will display on the My Search. The default, whenever you first pull up your editing attributes, is going to give you every possible field that you could add to a search in Realist. That might look a little intimidating to some, so here on the left side of my pop-up, it's split into categories. Owner information, listing information, sales information are just some of these categories that all of the fields are split into.
That's all under edit attributes?
Yes, ma'am. Whenever we have either added or removed the attributes that we'd like for our search, we'll click apply. Like with the counties, there is a limit on the number of attributes that we can add to a search, and that limit is 30. But it will tell you at all times how many of those slots, so to speak, are filled. So once I click apply, it takes me back to my search screen. I'm going to enter search Edmond. Now, if you're just searching for an individual city, then you don't necessarily need to add it with this plus sign. I'm going to go ahead and do that anyway. And before I get into entering more of these criteria, just some more characteristics of these individual attributes. Just going from top to bottom, left to right, each attribute has a down arrow, so maybe we don't need unit number for this search, but we want to keep it on here anyway because we might want to use it later. We can just minimize it by clicking that down arrow. Back to the hyperlink text. Usually, if it's just a name of a place, you're going to see that is or starts with. Let me find something that's using a number. So, for example, bedrooms or baths. The default is between, so it's going to give you the option to use a range. The options, if I left click on is between, like with our other fields, we have is. So if we want an exact number of bedrooms to search for, is greater than. So we want anything bigger than what we're typing in this field, or is less than. So anything under whatever I'm going to type. So if I choose either of these bottom two, greater than or less than, that's just going to give me one field to type in, since I'm not looking for a range, a definite range. The thing you have to be careful for here is that it's not greater than or equal to. So unlike in the MLS, whenever you do a search, if you're searching for 4 bathrooms or more, for example, you would select 4 plus, right? That's not really, it'd have to be greater than 3.5. I know that sounds odd, but that's the way that you have to think of it in Realist. Oh, why is it giving me red? Oh, because there are no half bedrooms. So if I wanted to do 4 or more bedrooms, I would do greater than 3. So I'll leave that there. Baths, I'll just go between, I don't know, 2 and 4. And then another type of field that you will see is a select from list. The most commonly used one of these attributes is the subdivision. So it's going to give you the option to select from a list. If I left click on that, it'll give me another pop-up. So in the MLS, whenever you're performing a legal edition search, as it would be called there, you just type in your search. Here in Realist, a lot of these public record information providers, mostly county assessors, all those legal additions or subdivisions are already programmed into Realist. So it's a little bit more easy to search for these subdivisions. So the first thing I'm going to do is just type in the name of the subdivision or legal addition that I want to search for, and then I'll click search. Now, if you just type in the basic name of the development or the neighborhood, there's a chance you're going to get all of those phases or versions or different additions. But the great thing about this is that you can just pick and choose. So I've selected phase 1 of Silverhawk here. I'm going to click the add button, the arrow that's pointing to the right hand side, and it will add that Silverhawk phase 1 to my selected subdivisions. I'll go ahead and add phase 2 as well. If I had a few that I wanted to select, this list was longer, let's say, I can hold control down on my keyboard while I'm selecting these and just select them all simultaneously. I don't have to keep going back and forth. The subdivisions have a much larger limit than either of the last 2 items that we saw that had a limit. You can select up to 100 different subdivisions on the same search. I'm going to apply. I now have Silverhawk phase 1 and 2 added to my list. And I think that should be good enough. We can go ahead and run our search. Now, depending on how many results your search is going to generate, it might take a second. Also depends on how strong your internet connection is. I tried to do a search that would produce quite a few results, but not way too many. If I do get a search with too many results, let me see. If I remove Silverhawk from the search, just to show you an example, Realist has trouble processing searches that produce 1,000 results or more. So if you are too vague, you haven't entered enough criteria in your search, there's a chance you could run into this. And what that's telling you is that there are too many results. We need to either refine the search. If we want to export all of the results, we can. We can export them to in the form of a CSV file, an Excel file, and look at them on a spreadsheet, but we can't view that many results in Realist. It's just not equipped to display that many results. The other alternative is to show just the first 1,000. So I guess it will show 1,000, just not more. I'm going to go ahead and refine my search. I'm going to get Silverhawk back up here. And I'm going to run my search again. And when I get my results back up here, I'm going to switch my display to the grid. I'm going to look at the grid first here. So it's vaguely familiar. We have kind of a single line display. We see that a little bit in the MLS. It just has a different face, really. Columns are going to be similar as well. Since Realist is more public record oriented, then that's kind of the information that you're going to see in your default columns here. Now, if you're following along on your computer or you're following along here on your laptop or mobile device, your columns might look a little differently if you've performed a search already. We have the ability to edit the columns that appear here and the information that they're showing. In the bottom right hand corner, there's an edit grid button. If I click edit grid, whoops, it'll pop up. If I only want to show selected rows, so let's say I had specific listings selected. Let's say I only want to look at these two. It'll narrow down to just the selected properties. Once I've narrowed down, I do have the opportunity to restore the full results list. And presto, there are the rest of my 57 results. The last option here, if I want to show or hide columns, this is where I can either choose to show or hide columns based on the same information. These are all the same fields that we had available for us in the search. So right now I only have MLS listing indicator, listing number, address, and a tax ID or alternate APN selected. Much like in the MLS, we can adjust the size of my column or the width. If I click the top of the column or the heading of the column, it'll sort. Now, before we get into our other options down at the bottom, just kind of what some of these columns represent. So we have an icon here. This is actually my listing indicator. So if there is an MLS listing associated with it, this tag or this colored icon will actually tell me the status. Now, I don't know if this is like real time up to date, but Realist typically cycles much like Matrix does, so overnight. So if you do notice any inaccuracies, we do prefer members if they notice any data that looks incorrect in Realist, or if these tags or indicators look incorrect, just let us know. We'll send an email over to Realist's data team, and they'll get it corrected. I would say that the listing indicator is probably not a major deal, but if there's sales information on a property record that shouldn't be there, or an owner's name, then that is definitely something that needs to be brought to our attention and corrected. Moving on here, let me go in and add a couple of other different columns of interest here. I'm going to go to my show hide column attributes, and I'm looking at the foreclosure and distressed category. I'm going to add distressed sale and foreclosure indicators, and then I'm going to apply. Now, probably put those at the very end. So I'm going to go back in, excuse me. One thing I didn't mention before is that you can actually drag any of these items to put them in the order that you would prefer them to appear in. Just hold down the left mouse button or the left button on your trackpad, and then just drag it to the location that you want it. So once I apply, of course I don't have any of those. Okay, let me change up my search, because what I'm trying to do is get some foreclosure indicators to pop up here. Let's see. Guess it would probably be beneficial to actually edit my search attributes and then add those same categories to my search. So I've added a foreclosure indicator in distressed sales, which is going to be the same as the distressed sale indicator here. These are just going to be yes, no search fields. So I've removed the Silverhawk subdivision. I'm only looking for distressed properties, basically, or properties that are going through pre-foreclosure. Poor results. So while nothing's coming up from my distress sale indicator, I do have some hits on the pre-foreclosure indicator. It's going to be this yellow looking picket sign icon. We'll see when we get into a map search. These are it's a layer that you can add to the map, where it will tag those distressed properties or those pre-foreclosure bank-owned REO properties with the appropriate color of icon. So now I'm actually going to double click any one of these properties, and then that'll take me into the property details. If you perform a search and you're searching for a specific address, or just so happens that your criteria were so specific you produced only one result, then it will automatically just throw up the property details on the page. Can't say listing, it's not necessarily a listing, even though there may or may not be listing information in the MLS for this property. So the first tab of several we have here is going to be just your basic property details: owner info, tax info, assessment, characteristics, if it's if there's a building or real property on the land here. If there is any listing information, there will be a section that will give you the MLS number. If I were to click that MLS number, then it should take me into the MLS, and it'll actually show me any time that property has been listed in Matrix. Now, some of these older MLS numbers probably came over before Matrix was put in here in the MLSOK, but that's going to be historical listing information. So even if you notice something that on these old listings that needs to be changed, just let us know. It can be a little more challenging since that information came in from what people were using before. Some information that we need to complete these listings, we can't actually put in because something's required here for this sold listing, but something's required here and we can't change everything at the same time.
So the whole purpose of the changes that we're experiencing, is it fewer steps?
Changes?
Yeah, improvements, changes. Like,
Moving from the area. Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
let's
go
say
ahead.
the area isn't on there. So now it's just fewer steps, and that didn't benefit anybody except like here, the realtor. It didn't benefit the prospective buyer or seller. It just been. So are we getting to fewer steps to get where we want to be?
That's the goal, without straying too far from realist. That the improvements are just trying to ensure that the end user or the end beneficiary should be your prospective buyer, your prospective seller. And without, again, I'll just touch on it real quick. The reason that the areas were done away with, it was because it was just not reliable. It was not providing reliable data. It was not providing reliable results just because too many people weren't utilizing it properly. So we're trying to tighten those things up. So it may add a step here and subtract a step there, but the end goal is the most reliable and accurate data for not only our members, but their clients as well. So back to my property record here in Realist, if I continue scrolling down, I have the last market sale and sales history. If there is a foreclosure history, that will appear as well. Keep scrolling down, there's my property map. It will give you rough. I would take these lines with a grain of salt as far as the property lines go. Yeah, there's a disclaimer at the bottom. The data is deemed reliable, but is not guaranteed. And then a rough map location on the right side here. While I'm going through these tabs, if I did have multiple results, I can just kind of flip through them on the right-hand side. So I've got 1 of 4. I can go to the next one. I don't have to close out and then go back to or double click on my other search results. They're just here on the right-hand side for me. If I wanted to hide those photos, so let's say I had more than 4 results. I don't want to see all those photos cluttering up because maybe some of them have photos and some of them don't. I can hide or show photos in the far bottom right hand corner and toggle those on and off. The next tab in my property report is going to be comparables. It might take just a second to generate these. There we go. Now, you might be asking, how did Realist know what criteria that was set forth to produce these comps? If I go to preferences at the top, and I go to reports on the left-hand side, I can actually control certain preferences with regards to each of those tabs that we saw in the property report. So if I jump down to the comparables report, then it's going to give me some parameters that I can set whenever I'm asking Realist to show me comparable for whatever property I'm looking at. You can set the max, for example. You can go as high as 50. It goes in intervals of 5. I have mine set to 10. How do you want those sorted? Do you want it to be the distance from your subject property? Do you want them sorted by the sales date? Maybe you're just looking for recent sales. You aren't necessarily looking for every comp in the neighborhood. If you want those properties that only have images, or if you want to include the images of comps if they have them. Data source might be an important one. If you're only wanting properties that have an MLS record, then you can select that. If not, then you can select just public records or both. So all MLS listings will have a tax record. Not all tax records will have an MLS listing associated with it. So I'm going to keep mine on both. There are a couple of criteria you can set. Maybe I only want comps with a pool since my subject property has a pool. Basic criteria, so sale price, year built, beds, baths. I won't go through every single one of these, but.
Can you go back to that tax thing where you had both, where you said the criteria?
Yes, the data source.
Why would you do both if you get taxes when you both MLS?
Maybe tax is only going to search for those that it's just public record. Maybe it will not include anything with the MLS listing. That's my guess. It's going to be, I don't think there would be any sense of having both, yeah, if it was all inclusive. So may have misspoke there. Our search time period that we want to go back, comps, typically people aren't looking for anything over a year and a half, I would say. So you can set that time period here. I think it looks like a year is the longest you can go back. So there you go. If you did want to go back any longer than 12 months, then you can just enter a date range here. We can type it in, or I can click my calendar icon to select that range. There are auto-filled values, so if you just want to do the last 3, 6, 9, or 12 months, you can just click that link and it will automatically assign that date range for you. So if I go last 3 months, it'll go back to March 18th, and then I can hit apply, and it'll just throw auto-populate my dates in there. Something kind of neat as far as the square footage or area of your property or building on the property. If you want your comps to be within 40%, you can kind of narrow or make this difference as big as you want it. So basically, it's going to look for comps within 40% of the size of my subject property. So that's pretty big. We'll go within 20%. We'll kind of save these other preferences for whenever we get a good look at those tabs. So before I leave this screen, there isn't a save or an apply. There's a submit button in the bottom right hand corner. So we'll submit those changes, and it should add those to my my comp search. So top left, I'm going to go back to search. And if I want to apply those to my comps, it's probably going to be best to go ahead and just run this search again. I don't know for a fact that I had to do that. It went back to my results page, so it would probably just start the property report over once I clicked on one of those. Oops, I right clicked when I should have left clicked. Okay, so we're back in this Ashby Terrace property, and I'm gonna take another look at my comps real quick before we move on. So here are my 10 comps. Some of them have listings associated with them, some don't. We can see those characteristics here. All of these columns are going to be basically all those parameters that we saw when we were looking at preferences. If I were to come down beneath my comps here and click modify and then search, what that's going to do, it's going to take me back to that preferences page that we just looked at. If I want to print these, I can do that. I can either do a quick print, which will just kind of if I go to quick print, oh, it blocked my pop-up. Give me 1 second. Try that again. I'm on a laptop, so it didn't really give me a choice, but it just sent that to a PDF. It might automatically do that. So if I were to print these comps, this is how they're going to show up. It's going to have my map, kind of brief details for each of those. Well, I said brief, but it looks like it did all the details for those. And then if I want, I can print this PDF from here. If I'd like to save these comps, or excuse me, before I leave there, I can customize the print. And if I want to leave out specific tabs from these property reports, then then I have the option to leave those out. Same goes for saving, emailing. If I do quick, it'll just put this report into an email. Now, I misspoke again. This is actually, the modify is going to apply to my comps. However, the print, save, and email are applying to the entire report. I guess the modify would too, since it's taking us back to that page. So all these actions are going to apply to all of these tabs, not the comps. So my mistake. Moving on through the tabs here at the top, we have market trends for our subject property here. Just different charts that you can select whether or not these show up on this tab. Again, using that preferences button at the top. And each of these charts, it gives a description of the information in that chart. For example, change in sales activity, percentage change in sales activity compared to the corresponding month or quarter of the prior year. So this is just meant to be kind of a brief glimpse of current market trends. One of a few different ways you have to look at those. Neighbors, not necessarily comps, so just neighboring properties. you can take a look at. Neighborhood profile is going to be more of a demographics oriented information. So your population density, if you'd like, you can show gender, marital status, occupancy, what Realist has determined to be fair market rents in the county. We have quality of life, workforce, household income. That preferences tab we can use to include or exclude any of these. Realist uses Great Schools for school recommendations, but like with Great Schools, it's not exactly guaranteed that that's going to be your target school. If there is a pre-foreclosure indicator on the property in Realist, it will have a foreclosure tab where you can view that info in a little more detail. The assessor map tab we're going to ignore. It's not a feature that our MLS has employed. And so I'm going to go ahead and close my report. And with the remaining time here, I'm going to go into, first I'm going to show a few features of the map. And then I'll show how to export and print labels with the end of the course. So I've changed my display from solely the grid to solely the map. We can print this grid or map at the top. So if I want the map only, which it's set to, I can just select which display I want. It looks like it won't let me. It'll only let me print whatever the display is I have here. I can switch back and forth on the satellite view or just the road view. If I want to do a hybrid, there's one that throws the roads on top of the satellite images. Let me move my webinar stuff down here so that we can see our tools. So Realist has drawing tools much like the MLS search does. We can do a radius or a circle, a rectangle, polygon. If we just want to draw a line from one destination to another. We can actually annotate and make notes. I'm just going to use a radius. And let me zoom in here a little bit. So I've selected my radius. So I've left clicked. Don't have to drag it with my left button held down. It'll tell me the area of my shape, the length of the radius to my circle, and the total area should match the shape there. If I left click on my shape, I can name it. So if I've created a shape that's a specific area, I can just name it that area. Or I can delete my shape. Boundaries. This is going to be my next tool down on the right-hand side. I can apply up to 6 different either boundaries or icons I'd like to add to my map display. Most of these I'll have to zoom in a little bit, or at least for parcel I'll have to zoom in so it's grayed in. It says zoom in, so let me There we go. We've got the parcel now. And what parcel is going to do is give me kind of a rough property lines. So maybe it's tough to see for those of you sitting in the back there, but if I click on one of these properties, then it'll highlight the property lines. I'll get kind of a little bubble with the tax ID, the owner. If there is a home on the property, you'll get the beds, baths. Let me try to find one. Yeah. So if there's an MLS listing associated with the property that you select, you'll usually see a photo, MLS list price, list date. It just so happens I picked one that's probably maybe active. You get some options down underneath this bubble. We got a quick zoom. We can quick zoom in on it. If we want the estimated lot dimensions, you can left click on that value and it'll give you the estimated lot dimensions. If we wanted to view the listing, like back whenever we're looking at the listing detail or the property details, sorry, we could go straight to the MLS properties associated with that address or that assessor's account number. If we want to go ahead and look at the reports for this property, like we just looked at for our search result a while ago, we can look at those. If we want to look at the MLS photos, we can flip through those here in REALIST without having to go to the MLS listing. There are other boundaries that we can apply to our map. Some of them are a little more reliable than others, however. So neighborhood, probably it'll show some neighborhoods, your older neighborhoods, your Nichols Hills, Kelly Park, if you're in Edmond, those will show up, but not every single subdivision and legal addition is going to come up as a boundary. Your zip, city, county, those are a little more reliable since those are known boundaries that don't really change a whole lot. School district, I would rather you use the school district layer that's in matrix. If you're not sure how to find that, I can jump in here real quick and show you. I just don't want to spend a whole lot of time. So anytime you're looking at a map in matrix, there's this little layer button. And there you can look at your school districts, your elementary boundaries, middle schools, and so on. So that was kind of our solution for people that were seeing great schools posting something other than what that school district had on their map. We got the most up-to-date school district boundaries, and so now we have those. So we are working out a few kinks there. Some of those zones are, you'll see the boundary, but maybe not a school inside it, so you don't know what school it belongs to. But that's something we're building and improving on that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback for. So back to REALIST once again. If I move, the last boundary before I move on is the flood zone. So more applicable right now than any time I've ever taught this course because of all the rain we've had is this flood zone. So like with any other information, this is subject to verification by whoever's using the information, of course. But this can give you kind of a picture of what the flood zone plains look like. We have a key at the bottom that's going to show me what all the colors represent here. So orange is good. That's going to be out of your special flood hazard area. But let me jump through a couple of these others because we're running out of time quickly. Let me remove my flood zone. You can go through each of these whenever you have time, but we have distress properties that we can add. It'll show you the colors of each of those icons that I mentioned earlier and what they represent. You can look for any recent sales, MLS statuses. If it's expired or sold, you can look for certain time periods up to a year to go back. You can display property characteristics on the map here. Whoops. So beds, baths, building area, owner names. Probably don't want to apply those when I'm zoomed out this far. You'd probably want to be zoomed in a lot further if you were going to apply any of those. You can only have 6 of any of these layers or boundaries or statuses assigned at any one time. So it's probably best that you don't have more than 6 anyway, because it will really clutter up your map in a hurry. There are trend layers that we can apply. These are values that are calculated by CoreLogic, so I can't really guarantee the source or what data they're using to calculate these. You can tag points of interest on the map. So for instance, schools, police stations, hospitals, shopping. We can do driving directions. So we can either type an address, or we can, let me see if I can just select well, no, it won't do that for me. It's going to ask me to type addresses. But if I want directions from one address to another, I can do what would the round trip be, what would the shortest distance be, or what would the shortest time be. So before we run out of time, I'm going to jump back to my search that I had going earlier. And the next class doesn't start until 10:45, so I can go over just a little. Let me go back to my grid. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is exports. So this can be exporting in the form of a spreadsheet, so Microsoft Excel, or it can be in the form of labels. So if you want to send a mailer out through a neighborhood, you can create labels. This is really the only application that Realist is still kind of good for. Matrix has the ability to search public records now. So if I'm in Matrix, I go to search. I go down to public record. This public record search is going to use all the same information, excuse me, that search and Realist is going to use. So if you're just searching for public records, you want to see a property's history, sales information, you can use Matrix to do that now. And it's all the same fields and attributes in the familiar box that is Matrix. So that's kind of a newer feature within the past year or so. So exporting and creating labels is, I mean, it's really all I see that Realist is good for, which is, I guess, is good since they're phasing out the Flash, like I mentioned earlier. So I've clicked create labels. I get this pop up. It's going to ask me to select the format of labels that I want to create. I'll visit this export stat here in just a second, but as far as customizing my labels, if I want to have capital and lowercase letters, I can do that, or if I want to use all caps, so I'm yelling at all these people, sending my mailers out, I can do that too. The big thing here is using the tax billing address or using the property address. So the tax billing address it's got homeowners in mind. A lot of cases, the tax billing address is going to be the same as the property's address. But if in the case that it's a leased property or it's being rented, then it'll send it to the owner's address. Not you're probably not going to want to send a mailer to a tenant that's renting out a house, or maybe you do. So you can choose is the point here. If I just use the property address, if I want to show the current owner, I can create a custom label if I want to the resident living at, and then the address, for example. Now to touch on this export stat. So you'll see this whether you're creating labels or you're doing an export. It takes from the same 5,000 here. 5,000 is not a hard cap on the number of records you can export. If you're somebody that does a lot of mailers, that 5,000 you can hit that in a month, no problem. If you do need to exceed that number in a month, which it resets on the first of every month, and then just let the MLS help desk know, and we'll get that cap reset for you. So if I go to create, it's going to give me a Word doc. And there's my labels. This is WordPad. Looks like I don't have Word on this computer, but anytime you generate labels with Realist, be sure you just do like a test print on your printer before you actually stick your labels in, so you can make sure they're facing the right way. And the last thing is going to be export. So export, I can either do the grid, how it is, or I can customize and select which columns I want to show up on my export. So much like any other time we've selected criteria or our display attributes, we'll select which attributes we want. They'll display over here. Here's my export status again, showing me how many records of this arbitrary 5,000 I have remaining. And then I can either export it, or if I want to save it to where I can just come back another time, I can and then run it again. Maybe I can save it. So I see I've already got one saved here under test. So I don't necessarily have to put in the same search every time if I'm exporting a lot. I can just save it as an export and come back to it later. Now the neat thing about exporting is that if I really wanted all 180 of these eligible attributes to show up on my spreadsheet as columns, I could, and it wouldn't make a difference in the number of exports I'm sending out here. And once I click export, it's going to put that into a CSV file since I don't have Excel running. I can't really look at that. If I bring it up in WordPad, it's just going to be a jargon bunch of numbers. Yeah, it's just kind of. I know I went over time, so my apologies there, but do we have any questions either from here or the audience abroad?
Can you go back over the schools? I missed that. I wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry. How do I click on, is it the enter attributes?
Sure, give me 1 second. As far as adding it as a search attribute, you know, I don't know if that is, I don't know if you can add those to a search, especially since that's not really public record information that the county assessor keeps on file.
But I thought I heard you say if even though I put on there, you need to verify everything.
Yeah, in Matrix, you can use the map search.
Oh.
So this is just, I'm just looking at, it doesn't have to be the map for a specific listing. It can be the map whenever you're looking at where your property is when you're inputting a listing. If you're using the map to conduct a search, anytime you see this layer button on a map in Matrix,
Okay.
you can click it and you can do the entire school district or you can do individual schools.
Okay.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate everyone's attendance, both live and online. If you're not joining us for showing time here in just a few minutes, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
What's your name?
Dustin.